So to start off with personal statements, already we've had Yasmin talk a little bit about it. You probably know a little bit about it. It's supposed to, it's a statement that you send with your UCAS application to just explain why you want to study medicine. It's about 4,000 characters long, I think. And this is where you show exactly why you want to study medicine. This is where you use all of your work experience, reading, you show your achievements and everything. It's really important that you explain exactly why you want to study medicine, because it's not enough to say that you want to study medicine. You need to show exactly why you want to study medicine. So you need to emphasize on your good qualities and how they make you a good candidate. So yeah, just so before you start off, it might be a good idea to just maybe make a list of all the things that you can write about, and just think about reflect on every single thing you've done before, and think about how you can present them in a way that will sound good to the person reading your application. Things that you can include is, number one, your relevant work experience. There's things you might have done in a GP, in a hospital, things like that, and volunteering, like care homes. You might have, done some, might have volunteered in a charity shop, maybe a pharmacy. All these things can be really useful. And then extracurricular activities. These are things are not exactly related to your A-levels or medicine, but things that have helped you gain some skills that can be useful for you as a doctor. So if you play any music, any sports, these things can count as extracurricular activities. But I think with Cambridge, they don't really care so much about the extracurricular activities. So when you do write about them, make sure you connect it to a skill that is relevant to medicine and show how these extracurricular activities will benefit you as a doctor and will make you a good student. And third thing is supercurricular activities. This is especially important for Cambridge course. And if you look at other university websites, they probably won't talk about this a lot. They would probably just highlight, having work experience, volunteering, and your extracurricular. But Cambridge, they really like to see how academic you are, your academic interests, and that you love to read beyond your A-levels and go beyond the bare minimum that you need to do for your school. So, online courses, competitions, reading specific books, all these things, TED Talks, lectures. If you've been to a summer school, you might have had some experience like that, lectures and things. So if you had any experience like this, then it's really good to include that in your personal statement. And even if reading this, if you feel like you just don't have enough to talk about, don't worry. I think you still have enough time to actually go on and say more about it. I mean, do more research right now. You can just go ahead and watch some online lectures now, read a new book. If you go on websites like Medical Portal, you'll find a long list of books that you can read that are useful. And mainly, I think books like biographies of doctors, actual, books written by doctors is a good place to start. And if you read those things and connect that to your work experience or any other reading you've done, and that's a good way to show, your interest in medicine in your personal statement. And again, show not tell. I'm sure you've heard that before, but don't just list things. Make sure you explain why that's important. Each thing you write is important. And things not to include is unrelated activities. So I mentioned earlier that extracurricular activities are not so important for Cambridge. Even within extracurricular activities, if you were just writing that you play an instrument, you might as well not write it. But if you can explain how playing an instrument has helped you develop some skills that is going to be useful for you, then that's fine. But otherwise, if you have a lot of activities that you're involved in, there are some things that probably not worth doing that if they're not related to medicine. And another thing is, just like I mentioned earlier, don't just list things you do. So with work experience, let's say you've been doing, shadowed many doctors, been to a GP, shadowed nurses. Don't just list all of them. Focus on the reflection. It doesn't matter how much you've done. What matters is how much you've learned from your experiences. And also overly personal anecdotes. I'll come back to this later, but lots of people like to include their personal anecdotes to explain why they were inspired to study medicine. So maybe they have had a personal experience with, with some kind of injury or disease where interacting with doctors really and watching them work inspired you to, think about studying medicine. And that's a good way to start your personal statement, but don't spend most of your personal statement talking about it, because you don't want to attribute your personal statement to things that happen to you by chance, things that just happen to you because You don't choose, your life is not, things that happen to you that don't really, not things that you chose. I hope that makes sense. So you need to focus on things that, the research that you've done, the books you've read, and the first statement, the work experience that you've gone ahead and decided to do, and less on your personal anecdotes. And repetition. Yeah, don't repeat the same things again. Some skills like communication, empathy, those things are really useful, and you can talk about it once or twice, but don't make your entire first statement just about one specific skill or one specific thing you've done. Try to make it a bit more varied. So yeah, those are just some basic things. Now I'll go ahead and show some examples. So how should I structure my personal statement? So in general, I can divide it into 5 categories. First, your introduction, then your work experience, this is your medical work experience, like being at a GP or a hospital, things like that. And then you have your volunteering, which is, volunteering is, like I mentioned earlier, care homes, charity shops, things like that. Maybe tutoring students, things like that in your school, mentoring others. So these are great examples. Then you have the academic stuff, which is the super curricular activity that we talked about earlier. So this is especially important for Cambridge, but maybe not so much for others. So you might want to think about how you want to balance your personal statement as well, depending on what the university you are applying to. And then your conclusion. So that's the basic structure. And this is the structure that I went by. I actually had 5 separate paragraphs for each one of these. But I think a lot of people would suggest not doing that and instead grouping your paragraphs by specific themes or specific topics. And you'll see in a lot of the examples that I'm going to show you that people have chosen to mix specific things. So they might talk about an experience in a hospital that they had and talk about a skill they've gained from it, and then link it to some volunteering experience where they've developed those skills and maybe some extra reading they've done then because they just found really interesting. So it's a good idea to combine things of a similar topic together, because that can give your personal statement a bit more of a natural flow than just having separate paragraphs. Or you can have like a similar theme that you can have throughout your personal statement. This is what I had. In my personal statement, I made a lot of references to the differences in healthcare between here and India, which is where I'm from, and how those differences, helped me make my decision to study medicine. So if you have anything like that, it's a good idea to bring those up. So with the introduction, I think people generally go for one of these 3 ways to start it. So one is, I like helping people and I like science. I think that's something that most people will bring up in their personal statement. You can say that in different ways, but that's generally what people bring up. And like I mentioned earlier, you might want to bring, this is not for everyone, but some people might have a very specific personal experience that really influenced them to think about studying medicine. So if you're one of those people, then you can mention it in your introduction. And if you don't want to go for one of those 2 ways, then you can also just pick up an example from your work experience, like a specific moment or something you saw that really impacted you and made you research more about medicine or really influenced you. Those are the main 3 ways I can think of, but I have seen personal statements which are more creative than this, but this is just a starting point. So I've got 3 examples here. So this is, sorry. Yeah. So the first one at the top is my personal statement. I talked about a disease I was diagnosed with, which is in India, but it's not very common in the UK. It says healthcare by its own nature is radically different across the globe due to its political, geographical, historical, and cultural makeup. Being diagnosed in India, I was exposed to some of its realities in the developing world. And yet I experienced how a trustworthy, empathetic, and skilled doctor can bring comfort and relief at distressing moments in life. It is this privilege to help people at their most vulnerable, combined with my desire to contribute to the specific scientific field that inspires me to study medicine. So in this one, I've brought in a personal experience, but also in the end mentioned how, I like science and I like helping people. Just put that in the end. Second one here is a bit longer, and this person has tried to bring in an example from their work experience into their personal statement. And it says, I began my journey towards medicine with a fascination of the application of scientific knowledge to humans. I discovered doctors are like detectives, using multiple lines of inquiry to deduce the culprit behind symptoms. I was able to shadow a cardiologist in the USA and was excited by the high risks and the subsequent relief of a cardioversion, having recently studied the heart's electrophysiology. I also watched a transesophageal echocardiogram, and I learned that it was due to low amounts of fatty tissue in the area, showing the innovative nature of medical techniques. A surgeon performing a left heart catheterization explained to me how the chemical properties of the dye were used to highlight arterial stenosis, and was struck by how scientific principles undermine the procedure. So you can see this one is very different to the first one I just read. And you can see they've immediately gone ahead and combined their work experience with their introduction. That's something you can do, but as you can see, it does make your personal statement, your introduction, a bit longer. If that's and you might want to avoid that if because it might take up more space of your first statement right at the beginning. Another thing is that you can see this one has a lot of big words in the first statement. Please don't feel like you have to have a lot of fancy work experience. This is something Yasmin mentioned, but yeah, but if you have had an experience like that, then yeah, you can mention it. You can see the third example is a lot shorter. It says, my enthusiasm for medicine was sparked by my interest in the human aspect of science and applying my knowledge to find solutions to real life problems. That's a lot shorter, and it's very small, but it gets through the point and just says, yeah, it says the same thing, that you like science and you like to find solutions using science. And you can just go ahead and talk about work experience right after a small introduction if that's what you like. Medical work experience, that's the next section of your personal statement. So like I mentioned earlier, this like GP, hospital placements, like that. I should also mention that it's okay if you don't have lots of work experience, because we know that all universities are aware that because of COVID, and people haven't had the same access to opportunities as they have had before. And even without that, even some people might just know lots more doctors and be able to access work experience much easier. So it's okay if you don't have lots of work experience, but make sure you use all the online resources that are available, like the Brightness like virtual work experience and Observe GP. I think those are really good examples. And if you can bring up specific skills, or things that you've learned, reflections from these experiences, then that's a great idea as well. You don't need to have lots of work experience. But yeah, 2 examples here. Observing several GPs explaining treatment plans in primary care highlighted the importance of flexibility in communication and manner to interact with different natured patients, helping them to feel involved and self-motivated. As a student mentor, I've learned to use different teaching styles to engage different students and encourage them to actively develop their knowledge. Demonstrating a hard dissection during a Year 7 induction day, I adapted my description to the appropriate level and was rewarded with keen interest. So you can see here, they've started by talking about GPs and the skills that they displayed, like communication and communication mainly, and how they interact with patients. And then they've not just saying that it's important that those skills, they've seen those skills, they've also gone on to explain that I have these skills as well because I've demonstrated a hard dissection, and this is how it's really a good idea to do this, because it's not just about what you've seen, it's also what you've done. And again, this is an example of how you don't have to have a strict structure of your volunteering and your work experience as separate things. Here they've combined their sort of volunteering with the work experience section of their personal statement. So that's a good idea. Another example is to learn more about a secondary care setting. I shadowed a geriatric consultant in a hospital. I was struck by the calm and sensitive approach of the doctor towards patients, most of them too weak to communicate. Multidisciplinary team meetings emphasized the importance of teamwork, as doctors, nurses, and healthcare assistants, among others, came together to carefully discuss the treatment of individual patients. I've honed these skills through working at a pharmacy, where I interacted with the public in a professional setting, developed time management skills, and observed the pharmacist's role in providing advice and services. So again, it's very similar, talking about communication skills that they've seen, and then talking about how they have honed these skills by working at a pharmacy. So it's a good idea to use this sort of format in your personal statement, where again, you write about what you've seen and then how you can show those skills. The third thing is volunteering. And again, with volunteering, lots of you might have done lots of volunteering. I did a lot of volunteering before coming to university. I did things like special schools, care homes, nurseries, pharmacy, things like that, lots of things. But it's important that you don't just list them, and again, reflect on what you've learned. I keep saying that a lot, but it's just really, really important. So for example, volunteering in a charity shop for 2 years, I formed close relationships with many of my customers and listened to their stories and opinions. which required patience but was very rewarding. I gained an insight into the challenges of working with and relating to people from different backgrounds with different perspectives, but also the enjoyable nature of engaging with the public. The second one is, whilst volunteering in a care home, I learned the significance of simple human interaction by how much the residents valued social activities, showing the importance of social well-being and how health runs deeper than just a physical illness. So again, these are two really good examples of how the relating experiences from volunteering to medicine, because yeah, these are both have examples of human interaction, but you can do any kind of volunteering and connect it to medicine. The next one is academic. I mentioned earlier, this is specifically important for Cambridge because they care more about academics than other universities. So this includes things like any articles or recent news, relevant news that you might have read online, lectures or talks that you've attended. It could be online lectures or in person, it doesn't matter. TED Talks, things like that. Books you read, online courses, things like FutureLearn. Yeah, there's also great websites to do online courses from, podcasts, any academic work experience that you've had, like a lab or research placement. I know there are some of those things available. So if you've done anything like that, it's a good idea to talk about that here. And your EPQ. If you've done an EPQ, this is like an excellent place to talk about it, because you may not necessarily be asked about in your interview, and EPQ is not really, I don't think there's no university that asks for an EPQ, so this is a really good place to bring that up. So attending a presentation by the Nuffield Council on Bioethics on the management of dementia highlighted that vulnerable people can fall through gaps between health and social care. I learned about respect for the past and present wishes of patients and realized that their best interests are hard to determine. And the second one is reading That Science by Ben Gold, I don't know how to pronounce the name, introduced me to pseudoscience and influenced me to be more conscious about legitimate scientific claims often seen in the media. I was particularly intrigued by the truth behind homeopathy, a form of alternative medicine still prevalent in India. Despite no clear scientific basis behind it, the expectations of the treatment and placebo effect continue to keep it deeply embedded in the culture. The second one is actually my personal statement. And I mentioned earlier that in my first statement, I had a theme of comparing my experiences to healthcare in India. And this is how I just brought it up, because it's something I found really fascinating when I read this book. And in the first example, something I want to highlight is that they've mentioned that the difficult parts of medicine, that's something that sometimes people tend to forget. You talk about how amazing medicine is and how doctors seem to get and really enjoy what they do. But you also need to mention that you know that medicine is not it's not all about having fun and saving lives. There are some negative aspects to it, and making sure you mention that you are aware of it is a good idea. But these are just two examples of academic work experience. You can talk about so many other things. You can talk about I talked about some lab work experience I had in the University of Exeter, how they investigate diseases in a lab, which is not really about medicine, but it's still, I found really interesting. So you can talk about anything, any research you've done, really. And extracurriculars, again, it's not really important for Cambridge, but Cambridge is not the only university you're applying to. I'm aware that lots of other universities like to emphasize on the fact that they want well-rounded individuals, so people who have, do activities outside of the academics and outside of medicine. So you probably will need to include this. Again, just don't list things. Make sure you connect it to a skill or reflect really well on it. So some of the skills that are really important to include are things like leadership, communication, organization, time management, empathy. So yeah, there's so many ways you can connect this. So some examples are representing my college at debating and running the Feminist Society have honed my ability to listen and speak with clarity in high pressure situations. For 12 years, I've done gymnastics, which has developed determination, self-reflection, and discipline. I coach on a voluntary basis, requiring me to teach skills responsibly and safely. As a committed musician, I regularly attend jazz band and orchestra and hold grade 5 saxophone. More recently, I have been interested in linking my love of music with my passion for science to explore the effect of music on the brain. I'm particularly fascinated by the increased size of corpus callosum in musicians, as this was apparent in Albert Einstein's brain, and so questions arise about the relationship, if there is one, between music and perceived intelligence. The first two are quite similar. They talk about some extracurricular activity they've done and link it to a skill that they've gained from it. The third one is a bit more interesting, and there's something you can do in your own first statement. If they've taken an interest outside of medicine and science and linked it to something relevant to medicine and science. I found that really good. So this one has combined both extracurricular and academic aspects of the first statement. Personally, I have to mention this again. Something else is that I did not mention any extracurricular activities in my first statement, and mostly it was just because I didn't have anything to say. I don't play any major sports, or I can't play any instruments, so I just didn't have anything to say. And the other universities I applied to, apart from Cambridge, didn't specifically mention that they want you to do extracurricular activities, so I just thought not to include it. And I still got offers from all the universities I wanted to do, so just keep that in mind. And your conclusion. The conclusion is the last bit of your first statement. I would say don't worry too much about it, and you probably won't be bringing up any new things in this section. It's just just to tie everything together, everything you've mentioned so far. And yeah, the first one, one at the top is mine. My exposure to social political situations in developing and developed countries, fascination for science, passion for social services, and quest for continuous learning drives me to study medicine. I look forward to becoming a committed doctor and facing the challenges ahead. Studying medicine opens up a huge variety of career paths, but all doctors I have met are enthusiastic and committed. I'm confident I will share this enthusiasm and commitment and would relish the opportunity to make my contribution to life at university and to medicine. And third one is, with all this newly acquired knowledge and experience, I believe I understand the skills needed to be a doctor, and I've successfully demonstrated a number of them. Although medicine is a highly demanding profession, the prospect of improving people's lives and finding cures excites me. So you can see all of them say kind of the same thing, and none of them really add anything new to your overall, the bulk of your first statement. So yeah, it's just something that, and so don't spend too much time or too many lines on the conclusion. So just in case, when you write, if you haven't started writing your first statement, then you might be thinking, how am I going to fill in 4,000 characters with things to write? But once you start writing, you might find that you just don't have enough space to write everything you want to write. So Yasmin already mentioned this earlier, but the FAQ is a really, really good place to write anything extra that you want to write. I did not write anything in my FAQ, but it's just space. And one thing that's a bit lesser known, lesser used, is the teacher's references. Now, you can't actually see what the teachers write about you in the references, but you can ask them to include specific things. For example, I did not have space in my personal statement to include things like physics Olympiad, chemistry Olympiad, and things like that. So I just asked my teachers if they could include it, and they did. So it's just a very easy way, and then I didn't waste a lot of space in my own personal statement. I had more space to include my work experience and more medicine relevant things. Yeah. Some final tips before I finish. Yeah, I mentioned this earlier lightly, but mention that you are aware about the difficult aspects of pursuing career in medicine, not just the good bits. And yeah, just make sure you know that it's it's a career of lifelong learning. It's not that you just finish your degree and that's it. Make sure you know that. Yeah, just some two important things. And don't lie about anything. And yeah, I think that should go without saying, but yeah, make sure you don't lie about anything. Be honest, in your personal statement. You don't have to just write. If you look online, you'll see that many people talk about some specific things that you should write in your personal statement. Don't feel like you have to follow that advice. Make it personal to you. It's yours. Don't lie about anything just to fit in a certain box. So, and also make sure that anything you do write about, that you can talk about it in depth. Like, I think you don't have to know every single word in a book you read, but if you've mentioned a topic in a book, then make sure you can talk about it. For example, I mentioned a lecture I attended in a university in my first statement, and I got asked about that. It was the very first question I got in my Cambridge interview, so you could get asked about it. Your interviewer probably hasn't read the book or what's the lecture that you're talking about, but they will want to know why you wrote about it and what you found interesting about it. So make sure you can talk about it. And finally, just remember that it's only one part of the application. It's not the whole thing. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's more important than your BMAT or your A-levels, because all of this is happening at the same time. So don't just, think about the first statement and put everything aside. It's just one part, and yeah, just remember that.